Hello everybody and welcome back to another video with the 2022 season of the Overwatch League kicking off in a little over a week. I wanted to, before we jump into the power rankings, give a little update on some of the rosters and some of the moves that they have made. A lot of the teams have made pretty significant moves since I covered their rosters in my breakdown videos. Some of the teams still have more moves to make, and I will talk about them when we get to certain teams. A team like New York has not officially announced who their sixth player is yet, though they do have a sixth player. We know they have a sixth player. We just don't yet actually know who it is. So with that in mind, there are obviously going to be some more changes between now and the start of the season, but I figured the best thing to do is I can at least give you most of the roster moves that are going to happen between my breakdown videos and the power rankings that are going to come out at the end of this week. So, also, happy beta day, everybody. It's the beta day when you're getting this video. Hopefully you all got into the beta. Hopefully I got into the beta. I don't know yet, so we'll see what happens. Let's real quick go through all of the roster changes that I have not yet talked about from this off season. I'm going to do this in order of the where they finished in the 2021 regular season. So Shanghai at the beginning, Valiant at the end, and that's how we're going to work through this list. So starting from the top, Shanghai Dragons. Since I talked about them, they announced that they added Bebe to their roster, adding a secondary flex support player. I think it's a good move for them. Obviously, that gives them the flexibility. If they need a double flex support meta, they can run Bebe and Izayaki. If they just need, of course, the normal main support and flex support, they have Izayaki and Lee Jae-gon. It gives them a very well-balanced team there. They have two tanks that I'm very comfortable and confident in, and then also three DPS players. So a really well-rounded Shanghai Dragons roster. I think this is a fantastic team with some really good pieces, and so they are one of my teams that I think the addition of Bebe really helps them out. Maybe, not as much as some other moves we're going to talk about here today, but I think it does make them a more well-rounded roster, a more complete roster, and I think it makes it a pretty solid move, all things considered. Next, we have the Atlanta Reign, who signed Speedily. Of course, he is a former American Tornado player, alongside with OG and Ultraviolet, who also got added to this roster. He fits in this roster, I think, very, very well. The reason why he is not signed at the beginning of the season, of course, or earlier in the offseason, because of his age. He doesn't turn 17 until pretty late in the season, I believe the end of July or end of August, whichever one, Originally, his birthday wasn't at the cutoff, but they moved the cutoff back a month because they delayed the start of the season a bit, and so he ends up signing with the Atlanta Reign. So he is their now fourth DPS player, but presumably the idea is that when he is old enough to play, he will most likely replace Nero, but Nero kind of talked about going into the season that he kind of got an opportunity that was too good to pass up, and that's why he even is in the league in the first place. And so I think this is kind of a good way to have Nero be the guy for the beginning of the season, and then late in the season, assuming the team goes the distance and does pretty well, transition speedily into a more prominent role in that rotation alongside Venom and Kai. Most likely Kai being the top one there. So I think this is a great move, and this really does elevate that DPS position for this Atlanta Reign team, and I think overall will be a good positive change for them. Next is one of the big ones with the San Francisco Shock, of course, Super retiring from the league before the season kicked off, basically saying that he did not have the interest for the game as a competitor that he thought he would have going into the season. Obviously, a huge loss for this team. Super, one of the most highly regarded tank players and just players in general in the Overwatch League and in the history of the Overwatch scene. So having him leave is a pretty big loss, not just as a player, but also just as a personality. And to replace him, they decided to go with Kalyuj, or formerly, Cucumber, whatever name you want to know him by. I think he was also Hagan at one point, if I remember correctly. But Kalyuj is the guy who they brought in to replace him. Another guy who has some history with the American Tornado team. Spent some time with a number of those guys. on AT. Spent some time with Bobby Wasabi and Maryville Esports, some of those teams that were also the homes of your American Nintendo guys. Been around for a long time, and so he is an off-tank player, not a main tank player, so it'll be interesting to see how they work with him over Super. But obviously that puts him with Sam, who they have some experience playing together, so an interesting move, of course, when you consider this team. A lot of really big-name Korean players joining this team in the offseason with Proper and Kilo and Finn. And then you have Sam and Kalyuj, a very young team now, with Violet being the main veteran presence. So it'll be interesting to see how this team is able to function without Super. I definitely think it hurts this team quite a bit, having Super retire and have to figure out how to kind of make this team work as well as it would have with Super. Though, who knows, maybe Kalyuj does have something to bring that we would not have seen as Super. So it's always possible, and I think it could be a very interesting thing to see what the Shock are looking like as we move into 2022. Next team is the Seoul Dynasty. Jonak announcing that he would retire because he had some health-related issues, and so he chose to step back from the league and retire. Definitely would love to see Jonak return at some point. Obviously, I'm an NYXL fan, so seeing Jonak retire definitely hurts. Animo is the last man standing from that 2018 NYXL roster. Who would have guessed that he would be the one left at the end of it all? But definitely hate to see Jonak retire. I don't necessarily think it hurts the Seoul Dynasty too much. Obviously, double flex support is not going to be as easy a thing to run with just Creative and Vindame, but I don't think it's necessarily impossible. When I did my breakdown for this roster, one of the things I talked about was that I was a little concerned about how they were going to balance playtime between Creative and Jonak. I think both of those teams both of those players were going to compete and split a lot of time. Well, let's get rid of that problem. You don't have to worry about that anymore. So, obviously, some negatives losing Jonak. He's a big name player, someone who everybody knows. He's a long history in the Overwatch League. He's a former MVP. But you do also get the ability to streamline your support role. You know who you're going to have. Rumblings make it seem like double flex support might not be so good to start the season. So at least it's something that they had something else for. They had another flex support, so it's not the biggest loss. It does hurt them a little bit, but I don't think it's going to destroy this team. Next up, we have the Houston Outlaws, who announced that Jake will be moving on to a full-time coaching role. He's no longer a player coach. This actually is both a concerning and not concerning thing. It's concerning in the sense that the assumption was that maybe Jake would be their main support player, the guy who plays their Lucio, plays their Brig, stuff like that. Now they don't have one, but also I think Jake becoming a full-time coach takes away some of the distraction in the staff, and I think it makes him more. Jake's role is way more defined now for what he is and what he's going to do for this team. He's going to coach. That is the role he's going to bring. And he's a high-level player who can kind of be there to help the team in that regard. But I think him being a full-time coach does overall provide a net positive for him as a member of the organization. But it does concern me because they don't have a main support right now. I don't know what they're going to do about that. I don't know who they're going to eyeball, if they're going to have anybody. It seems like they're going to roll with what they have. They're not going to send a main support player. And they're just going to have Iris or Lastro learn how to play main support, which is certainly a move. So we'll see what happens with this Outlaws roster, but definitely happy for Jake to be in a full-time coaching role, which I think will be better for him. But the team, I think, will need to find a main support at some point. Philadelphia Fusion actually announced their move yesterday with the announcement that they have promoted Belosri, I don't know how you are supposed to pronounce the name, a main tank player who has been on T1. They have promoted him to their roster, so he will be their tank player alongside Fury. Good move, in my opinion. Obviously just makes this team more well-rounded, which is my big thing with this, is anytime you can just add a player that just makes your roster more well-rounded, I think it's a good move. Obviously, Fury is a player who we know is a very talented off-tank player. We've seen him play Arisa in the past. We've seen him play in that kind of main tank role when possible. But I think that now that you have Bellisria on this roster, you have more flexibility. You can have Fury focus more on the heroes that he's really strong at. You can have Bellisria focus more on the heroes that he's really strong at, with things like, the Winston and the Rhine, and the Arisa and the Wrecking Ball. Those things that are more in his wheelhouse. They're not necessarily in Fury's wheelhouse. Helps balance out this Fusion roster, which I think is a solid roster. Now makes them even stronger in an Eastern region that could be somewhat tough going into the season, especially when you are going up against the reigning champions in the Shanghai Dragons. Next, we have the Boston Uprising. Made a very interesting move, adding Itzal to their team. He's a main tank player who most recently spent time in contenders with Uprising Academy. Was also with Gen G for a little over a year, and was also in like Gen A and Gen S. So he was with the Gen G organization for a long time. But they added Itzal to their team. They promoted him. Main tank player, known for stuff like his Winston, his Ariza, his Reinhardt, which is an interesting move when you consider the fact that the other main tank player that they had, or have, is Marvel, right? Who we know a lot of for his Sigma, but also we've seen him play the Reinhardt. And so we know he plays stuff like that. He plays main tank. And they also still have Punk on this team. So the addition of Itzal is weird, but to be fair, it is not uncommon for the Boston Uprising to have more tanks than they need on their roster, considering they've done it before. So it happens, I guess. I'll be interested to see what happens with this team and who they actually have as their starting main tank between Marvel and Itzal, and I guess also with Punk. Punk, I would assume, would be the guy for the Diva, the Zarya, if necessary, but will Marvel be their Sigma? Will Itzal be their Winston and Arisa and Reinhardt? Will Marvel be the Reinhardt? There's a lot of questions that this opens up for me with Boston Uprising. And to me, that's more bad than good. I think options are good to a degree, but when you have too much overlap with your options, and it's one role and you have 3 people fighting for it, I think that will cause some potential issues for this team where I'm a little more concerned. So this one makes me more confused than the other ones do, but it's definitely a move that we will just have to wait and see what the implications are once the season actually kicks off, why they have decided to add Itzal. But they have, and that's really what we can go off of at this point. Next team, the team that made the most moves since my last video on them, is the Florida Mayhem. The first move they made is they announced the addition of Kriv to the team, so they have a double flex support potential composition here, which is very nice. They have Kriv and Sir Majed, as well as, of course, Animo there on the main support role, so definitely good for them to have more diversity to their backline, right? More options, more things they can actually run, which is nice. Also, the fun little history that Kriv, of course, former member of Mighty AOD. He played with players like Erster and Fate, which is always fun to see. Some of those players still around or have been around recently. Obviously, like DM's on that roster as well, so always cool to see some of those like historical like rosters and some of those players who've been around for a long time still on the rosters in the Overwatch League, which is nice to see. But on the addition of Kriv, I think Kriv does bring a lot to this team and adds quite a lot more than I expected. I was kind of concerned by the signing at first because I felt like it didn't really make sense. But the more I kind of thought about it, the more I realized I think it's actually a fantastic signing and one that I really like. So that's always cool. And he's reunited with Animo, who also at one point played on Mighty AOD, but his name was Sleep back then. So this backline has played together in the past, and so that is always cool to see them reunited. The other two moves that they may have made, of course, was the big move of releasing Mirror and signing ATVI. I know there's always going to be people who get kind of disappointed when they see something like this happen, when a player like Mirror gets released right before the season starts, in favor of someone like ATVI, and there's always the question of, well, why? Why don't you keep him on the roster? I thought Albert coming out and basically saying that the reason why was that they just didn't think that Mirror had the role in the team that they thought he would, and they basically were like, we would rather release him than have him sit on the roster, which I agree with. I think if you're not going to have room for someone on your roster, they're not going to do anything on the team, I think it's better to give them the option to pursue other potential opportunities than to keep them on your roster. Yes, some of those players would maybe be perfectly content sitting on the payroll and making money sitting on the bench. Some of them might not be, and it obviously depends on the player and the personality, and some of them might prefer to actually be making money elsewhere and having opportunities elsewhere. By bringing in ATVI, they invest way more heavily in double flex support as opposed to double hit scan than double flex DPS. By having Mirror and Checkmate and Hydron, they were a roster that was way more focused on flex DPS capabilities and projectile DPS capabilities. But now with ATVI and Hydron, it is way more hit scan focused. They can run the double hit scan, which will seemingly be pretty good. I'm curious to see how ATVI or Hydron run the Sojourn, how the two of them do on the hero. So I like this move. I think ATVI being able to kind of be a secondary guy potentially to a Hydron is positive for this team, is a good thing. I think it gives this team more flexibility, and it actually, for me, really heavily increased my view on this team, because I think ATVI is a pretty major upgrade over Mirror. Obviously, they fulfill different roles. They're not the exact same player, but I really like ATVI being an addition for this team. And it obviously is unfortunate to see a player have to get released for something like this to happen, but I think these are two moves, the addition of Karev and the addition of ATVI, that really help the Florida Mayhem become a much better team. And I think this will actually have a positive impact on how I view this team going into 2022. Lona Spitfire made a move, of course. I'm not going to get too far into the reasonings why. If you do not follow what happened with the Lona Spitfire and why Provide was released from the team, that doesn't mean you can do some research on, but Provide no longer with the team. That is the last of I will talk about him. So they have a new flex support. We don't know who it is yet. As of me recording this video, I'm sure we'll know in the next couple of days, however, who it is. But that is one of the changes they will be making, and we'll see what happens when we get there. And finally, we have the LA Valiant, who officially announced the signing of Sashin since my last video, which we talked about that as being a move they were going to make. So just now we have the official confirmation that that in fact did happen. I believe those are all of the moves that happened since my last video on all of these teams. We can see moves on most of these teams here. Quite a good number of them making moves. I don't even know what the exact number is. About 10. I think it's 10. It's about half the league having made moves between now and the last time I talked about them. And still some more to come to be announced, like the NYXL, who their sixth player is, or the potential other moves with some of the other teams have been kind of teasing potentially having made. So we're getting close to the start of the season. We're getting close to my power rankings video, but for now, this is where we leave off for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.